We apologize for interrupting your doom scrolling. Now, for some positive leftist news.
Welcome to Positive Leftist News, everyone, the coziest place on the internet, where we come together and revel in all of the oh-so-satisfying leftist wins and the momentum that you won't hear about in corporate media. I'm your host, Mexi, and I'm here to remind you that the forces of reaction are always strongest when they're the most threatened. And threatened they are, monumentally so. So let's get into it. Everyone who said the Palestine solidarity movement was running out of steam were forced to eat their words this month when 400,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C.'s Freedom Plaza. With Palestinian, Yemeni, South African, and Puerto Rican flags in the air, the procession marched to the White House to demand a ceasefire and an end to Israeli occupation. The mobilization was organized by a coalition of Muslim American organizations as part of a global day of action, with mobilizations occurring in dozens of countries. At the march, Ismahan Abdullahi of the Muslim American Society said so long as the genocide in Gaza is being funded by this administration, we will not relent in our efforts to demand justice and the liberation of the Palestinian people. Just as South Africa courageously rose to rightfully charge Israel with genocide, we, the people of the United States of America, will rise and continue these efforts. With massive protests unrelenting all around the world, we will highlight just a few in this episode. In Norway, leftist and anti-imperialist groups held mass rallies to call for an immediate ceasefire and decry the use of Norwegian weapons by Israel against the Palestinian people. There was also a protest camp set up in front of the Norwegian parliament, which was unjustly removed by the police. Despite official restrictions on arms exports to Israel, activist claims that weapons produced in Norway are reaching Israel through intermediary countries like the United States. Various organizations, including the Red Party, Norwegian People's Aid, and trade unions, have called on the Norwegian government to prevent weapons from reaching active war zones. They demand more stringent controls and user declarations and condemn Norway's indirect involvement in Israel's military actions through NATO. The Red Party specifically urges a lasting ceasefire, an end to the blockade in Gaza, recognition of Palestine as an independent state, and international prosecution of Israel for war crimes. The party also advocates for sanctions, expulsion of the Israeli ambassador, a boycott of goods produced in violation of international law, and strict measures to prevent Norwegian weapons from reaching Israel. In Bangladesh, a massive solidarity rally and march took place in Dhaka. Organized by the Palestine Solidarity Committee Bangladesh chapter, the event brought together various communist, socialist, and left progressive political parties, organizations, educators, and writers. Professor Emeritus Sirajul Islam Chowdhury, a renowned academic and nonfiction writer, convened the gathering with a message from the Palestinian ambassador expressing gratitude for Bangladesh's solidarity. Protesters demanded an immediate halt to Israeli aggression and the massacre of Palestinians, the complete cessation of Israeli occupation, the establishment of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state aligned with internationally recognized agreements, proposals, and specific conditions, and a clear and robust commitment from the Bangladeshi government in support of the Palestinian liberation struggle. Following the event, a substantial procession featuring leaders and workers of the Socialist Party of Bangladesh marched through Dhaka City with banners, placards, and slogans demanding a free Palestine. At 5 a.m. in the morning on January 13th, Block the Boat protesters shut down the port in Oakland, California, in support of the besieged people of Gaza. Protesters stated their goal was to block the loading of a U.S. military ship transporting weapons to Israel that are being used to murder civilians every day. In an act of labor solidarity, the picket line was honored by the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 10 and 34. This is not the first time that ILW members have supported the struggle against apartheid. The ILWU has a long tradition of boycotting South African cargo and ships during the nation's fight against the racist former apartheid government. Amazing work to both the community organizers and the dock workers. Growing solidarity with Palestine is evident within the U.S.-occupied nation of Puerto Rico, where hundreds took to the streets drawing parallels between their own struggle against occupation and that of Palestine. This is the third such protest since the inception of the siege. Recent demonstrations organized by students and the Palestinian diaspora have marched from the Israeli consulate in San Juan to the U.S. federal court, and the movement Mothers Against the War holds weekly protests outside the consulate. Puerto Rico has a long-standing tradition of standing with Palestine, with environmental activist Tito Kayak having been arrested in 2007 in occupied Palestine for unfurling the Palestinian flag. As Diane Vieira of the Puerto Rican independence organization Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas said, like Palestine, we are also a people in resistance, a nation that exists and that continues and will continue to give birth to fighters who will not give up until the liberation of our nation is achieved. And perhaps the most monumental news of the month, South Africa has taken apartheid Israel to the International Court of Justice, charging them with genocide. A large majority of the 17-judge panel of the ICJ voted for urgent measures, which covered most of what South Africa asked for, with the notable exception of ordering a ceasefire. The court has ordered Israel to take measures to prevent and punish direct incitement of genocide in Gaza, which South Africa and human rights organizations are hailing as a victory and something that could increase international pressure on Israel. The court also said it would not throw out the broader case on the question of genocide. While a ruling could take years, there is, for the first time in the context of a US-backed genocide, a precedent of legality brought successfully against Israel. A growing number of countries have been expressing official support for South Africa's case, including Colombia, Bolivia, Malaysia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Turkey, Brazil, Namibia, and Belgium. All nations released separate statements endorsing South Africa's initiative, emphasizing the violation of Israel's obligations under the Geneva Convention. Colombia's foreign ministry called South Africa's lawsuit a brave step, and Brazilian President Lula da Silva expressed support during a meeting with the Palestinian ambassador. The Arab League and the 57-member Organization of Islamic Cooperation also declared full support for South Africa's case. South Africa submitted an 84-page application to the ICJ on December 29th, emphasizing the obligation of all state parties to the 1948 Convention to prevent genocide. The document argues that Israel's actions are genocidal in character. These acts, the application argues, should be considered in the broader context of Israel's conduct towards Palestinians during its 75-year-long apartheid, its 56-year-long belligerent occupation of Palestinian territory, and its 16-year-long blockade of Gaza. More exciting still, Mexico and Chile have filed a request at the International Criminal Court to investigate Israel's war crimes against Palestinians, and Indonesia has filed a separate case at the International Court of Justice against Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. This feels like such a significant historical moment, with the Global South uniting to challenge the military thuggery and moral depravity of the imperialist North. The time of US hegemony is quickly coming to an end, and we salute the bravery and commitment of everyone organizing globally against it. In Brazil, President Lula has recently approved the Father Julio Lancelotti law, which prohibits the use of hostile architecture aimed at preventing individuals experiencing homelessness from sleeping in public areas. Father Julio famously went out and smashed this architecture with a sledgehammer himself, saying that an architectural project conceived from the neoliberal system can only be hostile. We agree. The laid-off workers of the former GKN plant in Italy have been engaged in a 900-day-long struggle against layoffs and plant closure. In response to termination notices in July of 2021, the workers occupied the plant, launched a permanent assembly, and initiated legal challenges. Facing eviction threats, the workers and activists devised a plan to form a cooperative for the productive reconversion of the plant into an eco-friendly facility, focusing on producing cargo bikes and solar panels. Despite challenges from Melrose, the UK-based investment firm that took over GKN, the workers, affiliated with Metal Workers Union FIOM-CGIL and the Colectivo de Fábrica, continued their resistance. In December of 2023, the workers launched a crowdfunding campaign to finance the cooperative, named ex-GKN for Future, aiming to buy back or lease the plant, refurbish machinery, and start production as a worker cooperative. Despite successful legal challenges and community support, the workers continue their fight against government and corporate attempts to close the plant, emphasizing the need for community-driven decisions on production and a socially integrated plant for the ecological transition. All power to the workers. Italy, again, which is facing a severe shortage of doctors and grappling with issues in its healthcare system, has turned to Cuba for assistance, renowned worldwide for sending excellently trained medical brigades to help other nations. Nearly 500 Cuban health workers, including doctors, have been deployed across Calabria, particularly in the southern region, to address the shortage and improve healthcare services. The Cuban assistance was initially met with skepticism, but has proven very effective, bringing fresh energy and enthusiasm to the healthcare teams. The collaboration, which began during the COVID-19 pandemic, has been extended until at least 2025, showcasing the success of the initiative in addressing immediate healthcare challenges in Italy's poorer southern regions. The Cuban health workers have been praised for their dedication and positive impact on the local healthcare system. It's amazing what can be achieved in supporting human well-being, absent the profit motive. A newly formed nonprofit coalition in Atlanta, the People's Community Land Trust, has purchased a 9-unit apartment building in Atlanta's English Avenue community in order to lower rent prices and provide affordable housing. Everyone was surprised at our first tenant meeting when we said, yeah, your rents are going to be decreased. Everyone was like, what's the catch? Said Nishika Iyengar, the founder of real estate advocacy group The Guild, which is a member of the new land trust. But there is no catch. The People's Community Land Trust, a collaboration between the Guild, Housing Justice League, and the American Friends Service Committee's Atlanta Economic Justice Program, plans to lobby the city for support from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to advocate for tenant protection legislation. The organization aims to acquire additional properties to address Atlanta's housing affordability crisis. The strategy of the People's Community Land Trust mirrors a broader national trend among land trusts, expanding their focus to include affordable housing. In Argentina, on January 24th, workers held a national general strike against the anti-worker laws put in place by newly elected anarcho-capitalist president Milei. For the last several weeks, hundreds of trade unions, neighborhood associations, cultural groups, left groups, community kitchens, and social movements have been organizing local and neighborhood assemblies and meetings to mobilize for the strike. This national strike is historic, as it is the first time in recent history that the country's 3 major labor confederations are uniting for a joint industrial action. The General Confederation of Labor, the Argentine Workers' Central Union, and the Argentine Workers' Central Union Autonomous together represent millions of workers across all sectors. The Argentinian working class is coming together to categorically reject the far-right libertarian leaders' brutal austerity measures. Major solidarity with this historic strike. A federal judge has issued a temporary injunction blocking the state of Iowa from enforcing key aspects of Education Law SF 496, which led to the removal of hundreds of books from school libraries. The injunction prevents the enforcement of a ban on books on sexual orientation and gender identity in elementary schools, considered void for vagueness. The judge's decision follows challenges from LGBTQ students and educators who condemned the law for its censorship, discrimination, and violation of freedom of speech. The ruling is being celebrated as protecting educators and promoting freedom of expression while lawsuits proceed. Legal attorney Nathan Maxwell states this decision sends a strong message to the state that efforts to ban books based on LGBTQ+ content or target speech that sends a message of inclusion to Iowa LGBTQ+ students cannot stand. In a press release last updated on January 17th, the National Center for Transgender Equality and the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund announced that they will be combining their organizations to form a new group called Advocates for Trans Equality. Representatives from both the NCTE and the TDLEF stated that by combining efforts, the group will be able to provide more resources to combat ongoing legislative assaults on the trans community. Speaking of, 5 transgender youth and their families are suing the state of Louisiana to block the healthcare ban, which is now Act 466. If successful, the lawsuit will go a long way to defend the rights of trans youth and their families in the state. The lawsuit alleges that the trans healthcare ban is unconstitutional under Louisiana state law, as it violates the equal protection under the law for trans youth and their families, as well as their medical autonomy. And legislators in the state of Maine have introduced a safe state bill that would shield transgender individuals from prosecution. These safe state bills are designed to combat anti-trans legislation as seen in states like Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. Maine's safe state bill states that trans individuals in the state cannot have their medical records subpoenaed, and they cannot be extradited by other states for violations of out-of-state trans healthcare laws. PLM will be following these stories and hoping for more concrete wins soon. The Supreme Court of Justice in Panama has declared the abusive mining contract with First Quantum Minerals unconstitutional. This marks a significant victory for the Panamanian people and was a result of popular pressure, organized resistance, and sustained protests against the mining contract, which Panamanian citizens saw as illegitimate and a threat to national interests. It was indigenous communities, teachers' unions, university students, and residents of affected areas who maintained strongholds and mobilized against the mining contract. The ruling is being celebrated as a triumph over corporate interests and corrupt government dealings, and a victory in the broader fight against capitalist globalization. My friends, if you have good news from the current month, please send your stories to mexi@protonmail.com. Thank you to Javi for the positive news jams. Thank you to Cosmo for the positive news background. Thank you to Catherine, myself, and Marshall for scriptwriting and production. And thank you to Tristan for editing this video. If you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/positiveleftistnews, or you can give us a one-time tip via PayPal. The link is in the description box below.